They cut our PTSD counseling program to fund decorations for the White House, a Marine veteran in Houston stated with quiet fury, his story of frustration causing Representative Crockett to confront a senior official with a simple, powerful question about national priorities. Within seconds of the question being asked live in the committee hearing, the internet ignited. The clip, raw and unedited, leaped from C-SPAN feeds to social media, shared not by political operatives, but by veterans, their families, and thousands of baffled citizens. There was no hashtag, no coordinated campaign. There was only the stark, brutal contrast of the words themselves, counseling versus decorations. News networks, sensing the seismic shift in the day's narrative, broke into their regular programming, not with punditry, but by simply playing the clip on a loop. In newsrooms across the country, producers scrambled, canceling scheduled segments. The story was no longer about budgets or policy. It was about a single, devastating question that seemed to capture a nation's frustration in less than 30 seconds. The week before the hearing, the world of First Lady Melania Trump was one of serene aesthetics and grand visions. In the sunlit elegance of the White House map room, she stood before a large easel displaying an artist's rendering of a revitalized public park. The image showed ornate iron benches, elaborate floral arrangements, and a grand new water feature. Spread across a mahogany table were dozens of fabric swatches in deep blues and rich golds, samples for the planned refurbishment of several rooms as part of her Beautify America initiative. She ran a perfectly manicured finger over a swatch of silk damask. "It's about spirit," she explained to a young, eager aide holding a tablet. "When people see beauty and order in their public spaces, it lifts the national morale. It shows we care about the soul of the country, not just its mechanics." The aide, whose name was Corrine, nodded enthusiastically. "The press rollout for the D.C. Park project has been wonderful, ma'am. The initial polling shows people are very receptive to the idea of national morale." "It is a good message," Melania agreed, her gaze still fixed on the design. "It is what people need to feel, hope." Corrine cleared her throat softly. There was just one minor note from the Office of Management and Budget regarding the funding stream. To fully fund Phase 1, they had to make some discretionary transfers from other departmental pilot programs. "They assured us it's all standard procedure." Melania waved a hand dismissively, her focus unbroken from the color palettes. "That is their job, the details. My job is the vision." She picked up 2 swatches, one gold, one blue, and held them against the light. "The details are for the men in gray suits. The feeling, that is what lasts." She was not being cruel or dismissive. In her world, the immense, complex machinery of government was an abstract force that simply made things happen. Her role was to direct its purpose towards something she deemed noble. The origins of the money, the programs it was pulled from, these were merely numbers on a spreadsheet. The mechanics she felt it was her duty to transcend. The idea that cutting a line item in one department could extinguish a lifeline in another was a reality that simply did not exist in that sun-drenched room. Miles away in Houston, Jasmine Crockett was not looking at fabric swatches. She was in the back of a car, scrolling through emails on her phone between events in her district. Her finger stopped on a message from her chief of staff with the subject line, "You need to see this." It was a link to a clip from a local news station. She tapped it. The video was shaky, filmed in the parking lot of a VFW hall. A man in a simple polo shirt and a faded Marine's cap stood before the camera. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't crying. His face was a mask of profound, weary anger. His name, the Chiron read, was Sergeant Kalen Rivera. "We had a group," Rivera said, his voice low but steady. "There were 8 of us, all from the sandbox. This program, it was the first time some of these guys had talked about what happened over there. The first time. It was working." He held up a creased piece of paper. "Then we get this. Program canceled due to federal budget reallocation. Reallocation." He gave a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "Then last night, I'm watching the news. And the First Lady is talking about her new project, Beautify America, spending millions on statues and gardens to improve national morale. And I looked at this letter, and I looked at the TV, and I thought, whose morale? The reporter started to ask another question, but Rivera spoke over him, looking directly into the camera lens. They cut our PTSD counseling program to fund decorations for the White House. Jasmine Crockett watched the 30-second clip once, then she watched it again. Then, a third time, the audio off, just studying Sergeant Rivera's face. She saw the betrayal etched around his eyes. She saw the tremor in the hand holding the paper. This wasn't a political issue anymore. It wasn't about Democrats or Republicans. It was about a promise. A sacred promise made to the young men and women the nation sends into harm's way. A promise that when they came home broken, their country would not turn its back on them. She thought of the young people from her own district who had enlisted, full of pride and purpose. She thought of their parents. She immediately forwarded the clip to her legislative director with a short, sharp message. Find out who in the administration is testifying at the House VA hearing this week. Get me the exact name of this Beautify America initiative and every single dollar of its funding. I want to know where it came from, down to the penny. She leaned her head back against the car's headrest and closed her eyes. The image of Sergeant Rivera's face was burned into her mind. The fight wasn't just in a news clip anymore. It was coming to Congress. The House Committee on Veterans Affairs hearing room was a study in practiced indifference. Members shuffled papers. Aides whispered in their ears. And the witness at the central table, a man named Alastair Finch, radiated an aura of unflappable bureaucracy. As the Deputy Secretary from the Office of Management and Budget, Finch was a professional deflector, a master of the non-answer answer. His gray suit, perfectly knotted tie, and rimless glasses seemed to have been issued by the government as standard camouflage. He had survived dozens of these hearings. He knew the rhythms, the predictable outrages, the perfunctory questions that were more for the cameras than for him. He was prepared for a long, boring morning. The hearing began as expected. The Republican chairman from Ohio asked about construction delays at a VA hospital in his state. A Democrat from California complained about the disability claims backlog. Finch offered smooth, sympathetic responses filled with phrases like interagency collaboration, resource optimization, and a commitment to continuous improvements. He was a human tranquilizer dart, expertly lowering the temperature in the room. All the while, Jasmine Crockett sat silently, a few seats down from the chairman. She didn't shuffle her papers. She didn't whisper to her aide. She simply watched Finch, her focus absolute. Her stillness was more unnerving than any performative shuffling. When her turn came, the chairman, looking at his notes, announced, "The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Miss Crockett, for 5 minutes." Crockett leaned forward, her voice calm and measured, almost conversational. "Mr. Finch, thank you for your testimony today. I'd like to use my time to discuss the concept of national morale." Alastair Finch blinked. This was unexpected. He had been prepared for an attack on budget numbers or wait times. Morale was a friendly, abstract topic. He offered a small, confident smile. "Of course, Congresswoman. It's a vital component of a healthy nation and a key priority for this administration." "I'm glad to hear it," Crockett said, her tone evens. The White House recently launched the Beautify America initiative, citing, as you said, the need for a boost to national morale. Is that correct? And "Yes, precisely," Finch said, leaning back slightly. He was on comfortable ground now. "The First Lady has a deep and abiding belief that our shared public spaces should reflect the very best of our nation's character. It's an investment in our collective spirit." An investment. "I like that word, Mr. Finch," Crockett said, nodding slowly. "Let's talk about the specifics of that investment. Can you confirm for the committee the initial budgetary allocation for Phase 1 of Beautify America?" Finch had the number ready. "The initial operating budget for the current fiscal year is $50 million, Congresswoman." $50 million, Crockett repeated, letting the number hang in the air for a moment. And was this new money, Mr. Finch? Was this an additional $50 million that Congress appropriated specifically for the purpose of new benches and gardens? The first flicker of unease appeared in Finch's eyes. This was the turn. As is common with many new initiatives, Congresswoman, the funds were sourced through a series of interdepartmental discretionary transfers to ensure maximum fiscal efficiency. Crockett's calm demeanor didn't change, but her focus sharpened like a lens. That's a lot of impressive words, Mr. Finch, but you didn't answer my very simple question. Was it new money, appropriated by this body for that purpose? Yes or no? The room was suddenly quiet. The casual background chatter of aides ceased. Every eye was on Finch. He cleared his throat. No, Congresswoman. It was not a new appropriation. Thank you for that clarity, Crockett said. So it was a transfer. Money that Congress intended for one purpose was taken and used for another. Let's talk about those purposes. Are you familiar with the Department of Veterans Affairs pilot program called the Post-Combat Reintegration and Counseling Program, primarily operating in Texas and Florida? Finch's face was a careful blank. I have general awareness of a broad range of VA pilot programs, yes. Well, allow me to make you specifically aware of this one, Mr. Finch, Crockett said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone in. This program provided group therapy sessions for veterans with acute post-traumatic stress disorder. It cost, in total, $2.5 million a year to serve over 500 veterans in the Houston area alone, men and women who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Last week, Mr. Finch, that program was terminated. The official reason given was a federal budget reallocation. Do you see where I'm going with this, Mr. Finch? Alistair Finch's bureaucratic cool was beginning to melt under the heat of Crockett's focused questioning. He shifted in his seat, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly as he reached for his water glass. Congresswoman, thousands of programs are evaluated for efficacy and fiscal synergy on an ongoing basis. Decisions are made at a macro level. Crockett cut him off, her voice no longer calm but sharp as glass. Stop talking about macro levels and synergy. Let's talk about a micro level. Let's talk about a Marine sergeant in Houston who was told his PTSD counseling was no longer funded. I am going to ask you a very direct question, and the American people, especially the veterans of this nation, deserve a direct answer. Was the funding for the Post-Combat Reintegration and Counseling Program and other VA programs just like it transferred to help pay for the First Lady's Beautify America initiative? Yes or no? The question landed like a physical blow. Finch stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. He looked to the Republican chairman for help, but the chairman was stone-faced, staring down at his desk. There was no escape. The truth was now cornered, pinned to the wall in the full glare of the hearing's lights. Finch swallowed hard, the sound audible on the microphone. His career of deflection had just hit a brick wall. Congresswoman, he began, his voice strained. The enhancement of national morale is considered a vital interest, and the beautification projects were deemed. That is not an answer, Mr. Finch. Crockett's voice rang out, powerful and clear. She picked up a single sheet of paper from her desk. I have here a letter from a man who served 2 tours in Fallujah. His name is Kalen Rivera. He doesn't write about fabric swatches or flower arrangements. He writes about his friend who took his own life 2 months ago because the silence was too loud. He writes that his therapy group was the only thing keeping him from following the same path. She looked up from the letter, her eyes locking on Finch's. The lawyer in her had laid the foundation, and now the advocate was ready to land the final, devastating blow. He says the White House took his lifeline to pay for decorations. So I'll ask you one more time. The White House defended this reallocation by calling it a boost for national morale. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a fierce, penetrating whisper that carried more weight than a shout. What provides more national morale, Mr. Finch? New curtains in the Blue Room, or telling a veteran who served this country that we will not abandon them in their darkest hour? The room was utterly silent. Finch had no answer. He could only stare back, exposed and defeated, as Jasmine Crockett's question echoed in the sudden, vast quiet, a question that was already escaping the confines of the room and beginning its journey across a nation that was now paying very close attention. Alistair Finch's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The perfectly tailored gray suit suddenly seemed 2 sizes too big for him, a hollow shell around a man who had evaporated. He stammered, his voice a dry rasp. That is a false choice, Congresswoman." "It's the choice you made, Mr. Finch," Jasmine Crockett's voice cut back, sharp and final. "Or rather, the choice the White House made, and you are here to defend." "I see you cannot." She looked at the committee chairman, her expression unreadable. "I yield back my time." The chairman, a stoic Republican from Ohio who rarely showed emotion, blinked slowly, as if waking from a trance. He banged his gavel, the sound unnaturally loud in the charged silence. "The gentlewoman yields back. The chair now recognizes." But no one was listening to him. Aides were frantically typing on their phones, their faces illuminated by the glow of the screens. Reporters in the press gallery were already on their feet, slipping out of the room to file their stories. The other members of the committee, both Democrat and Republican, were no longer looking at the witness. They were looking at Jasmine Crockett. She didn't acknowledge them. With a calm that seemed almost surreal after the explosion she had detonated, she gathered her single sheet of paper and her notepad, slid them into a folder, and gave a brief, almost imperceptible nod to her legislative aide standing against the back wall. Then she stood up and walked out of the hearing room. Her exit was as quiet and deliberate as her questioning, leaving behind a chamber where the political landscape of the day had been irrevocably altered. The hallway of the Rayburn House office building was a gauntlet. Her phone, which she'd set to silent, was vibrating so intensely against her hand it felt like it might shatter. The low buzz was a physical manifestation of the digital shockwave she had unleashed. As she walked, doors opened, and staffers peered out, their faces a mixture of shock and awe. Her own chief of staff, Marcus, met her halfway to the elevator, holding his own phone up with a look of disbelief. "Jasmine, it's everywhere. Every channel. They've dropped everything. They're just playing the clip." By the time she reached her office, the firestorm was a full-blown inferno. Curtains versus counseling became the inescapable phrase of the day. It was the headline on every news site, the chyron on every cable channel. The largest veterans organizations in the country, the VFW, the American Legion, released scathing statements within the hour, not even waiting for the hearing to conclude. They didn't just support Crockett's question, they adopted it as their own, a rallying cry of betrayal. The White House was caught completely flat-footed. The afternoon press briefing was a bloodbath. The press secretary, a man normally skilled at navigating controversy, was bombarded with the same question phrased a dozen different ways. Does the president believe curtains are more important than veterans' mental health? Will the First Lady reconsider the Beautify America initiative in light of this revelation? He retreated to talking points, his voice growing increasingly strained. "The First Lady's initiative is a noble, patriotic effort to uplift the national spirit," he repeated, his words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "It is shameful that some in Congress are choosing to politicize a project meant to bring our country together." The statement from the First Lady's office came later, a carefully worded missive that only made things worse. It spoke of the profound importance of beauty in nurturing the soul of a nation, and accused critics of a cynical and divisive attempt to undermine an initiative that celebrates American exceptionalism. To a public now galvanized by the image of a betrayed Marine sergeant, the defense sounded breathtakingly tone-deaf. It was the sound of someone in a palace trying to explain art to a man drowning. That evening, the public victory felt very far away. In her small, functional D.C. apartment, the adrenaline had long since faded, leaving behind a leaden exhaustion. Jasmine kicked off her heels, the sound muffled by the cheap rug. She pulled a microwavable dinner from the freezer, peeled back the plastic, and put it in the microwave. knowing she probably wouldn't eat it. The triumphant warrior of C-SPAN was gone, replaced by a tired woman who just wanted to sit down. She sank onto her worn sofa and, against her better judgment, picked up her phone. The screen was a dizzying torrent of praise and poison. For every message from a grateful veteran or an admiring citizen, there was a jet of pure acid. She scrolled past threats that were both childish and chilling. Photos of her face were doctored into hateful images. Her address, though not public, was being speculated about in dark corners of the internet. They called her a traitor, a disgrace, a radical shrew. One message, colder than the rest, reads simply, "People who stand against the First family have a way of disappearing. Watch your back." She tossed the phone onto the cushion next to her as if it were hot to the touch. The landline on her end table, an old device she kept mostly for her mother, began to ring. She knew who it was. She took a deep breath and picked it up. "Hi, Mama. Jasmine, I saw you on the news." The voice of Melania Crockett was a mixture of fierce pride and palpable fear. "I swear, I almost jumped out of my chair. I am so proud of you, baby. But are you being safe?" Jasmine tried to force a lightness into her voice she didn't feel. I'm fine, Mama. It was just another day at the office." "It did not look like just another day at the office," Leona Mallory countered, her maternal radar cutting through the pretense. "You took on the White House, Jasmine. The things people are saying online, it worries a mother sick." Jasmine closed her eyes, pressing her fingers against the bridge of her nose. "Somebody had to, Mama. You should have seen his face. This man, this Marine, he looked hollow, like they'd taken the last piece of solid ground he was standing on. And for what? For fancy fabrics and flower beds? What was I supposed to do? Just sit there and let it happen?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Jasmine could picture her mother in her small kitchen in Texas, shaking her head slowly. "I know, baby. You get that righteous fire from your father, God rest his soul. He never could stand to see a bully get away with it. Just promise me you're being careful. Check the locks on your doors. Don't walk alone at night, please, for me." "I promise, Mama," Jasmine said, her voice softening. "I'm okay." They talked for a few more minutes about family news and church gossip, a brief, calming return to a world that made sense. After she hung up, Jasmine sat in the quiet of her apartment, the uneaten meal forgotten in the microwave. The conversation had solidified her resolve. The threats, the exhaustion, the fear her mother felt, that was the price. And the look on Sergeant Rivera's face was the reason she was willing to pay it. The next few days proved the issue was far from over. Crockett's office was overwhelmed. The phones rang off the hook, and the email servers crashed twice. The calls weren't from political operatives or media bookers. They were from veterans. A retired Army specialist in Arizona whose addiction counseling program was shuttered. A Navy corpsman in Virginia whose family therapy sessions were suddenly defunded. A National Guard unit in Pennsylvania that had its suicide prevention outreach program eliminated. Story after story poured in. A hidden epidemic of broken promises suddenly brought to light. It wasn't just one program in Texas. It was a pattern. Jasmine tasked 2 junior staffers with a single, grim mission. Log every call, every email. Build the database. Get their stories. Get their permission to share them. 2 days later, flanked by the flags in the House Press Gallery, she held another press conference. She didn't mention the First Lady. She didn't attack the President. She simply stood at the podium and read the stories. "From a sergeant in Tucson," she began, her voice clear and steady. "They told us the group was our lifeline. Last month, they cut the rope." She read another. "From a corpsman in Norfolk. How can I keep my family together when the VA cuts the one program that was teaching me how to talk to them again?" She read 5 stories in total, each one a small, personal tragedy. A universe of pain contained in a few sentences. She was no longer just a congresswoman asking a question. She had become the curator of a nation's ignored grief. The political world settled into a predictable, ugly trench warfare. The administration and its allies in Congress and the media framed the battle as one of patriotism versus partisanship. To them, Crockett was an ungrateful radical smearing the First Lady, a woman who only wanted to make America beautiful again. Crockett's supporters and a growing chorus of independents saw it as a clear-cut case of misplaced priorities, a government that valued appearances over people. The debate was stuck. The White House was convinced they could ride out the storm, believing the public's attention span was short and that the story would eventually fade. They refused to budge. Then, a week after the hearing, something unexpected happened. Congressman Thaddeus Morrison, a 70-year-old, third-generation Republican from a deeply conservative district in North Carolina, called a press conference of his own. Morrison was a retired Marine colonel, a decorated Vietnam veteran, and a ranking member of the VA committee. He was the embodiment of the old-school, gravel-voiced conservative establishment. The media gathered, sharpening their pencils for the story they were all certain he was about to deliver. A stern condemnation of Jasmine Crockett's lack of decorum and political theater. Morrison walked to the podium, his face grim, his posture ramrod straight. He adjusted the microphone. "Good morning," he began, his voice a low rumble. "I'm not going to take any questions today. I'm just going to say a few things. First, it is no secret that Congresswoman Crockett and I disagree on nearly every major policy issue facing this country. Her politics are not my politics. Her methods are often not my methods. And I believe that civility in our discourse, even when we passionately disagree, is essential." The reporters began typing. The headlines were writing themselves. Senior GOP veteran slams Crockett's tactics. Morrison paused, letting his opening remarks settle in the room. He scanned the faces of the reporters before him. "But," he continued, his voice lowering with intensity, "on the fundamental question she asked in that committee room last week, she was 100% correct." A stunned silence fell over the press corps. Fingers froze over keyboards. "I believe our First Lady is a good woman with fine intentions," Morrison went on, his gaze unflinching. "A nation that respects itself should have dignified public spaces. But a nation's true morale is not found in its parks or its architecture. A nation's morale is found in its character, and the core of that character is whether or not we keep our word." He leaned closer to the microphone. "When we send our young men and women to fight our wars, we make a covenant with them. It is a sacred, unspoken promise. We send them into hell, and if they make it back, we will be there to help them heal. We will care for them and their families. Full stop. There are no asterisks. There are no exceptions." His voice grew hard, the voice of a commander who had seen the cost of war up close. To take money that was promised for the mind of a wounded warrior and use it for anything else, I don't care how noble or well-intentioned, is a breach of that sacred trust. It is an abandonment of our duty. It is a failure of character. He took a breath, then delivered the final, decisive blow. "That is why, this morning, I have informed the Speaker of the House that I am officially co-sponsoring legislation with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Our bill will immediately restore the funding for these VA mental health programs. And it will include language that statutorily protects that funding from being used in any future discretionary transfers by any administration. We keep our promises." He turned and walked away from the podium without another word, leaving behind a room of reporters scrambling to rewrite every story, to reframe every angle. The partisan dam had just been broken. This was no longer a political fight. It was a moral reckoning. Congressman Morrison's announcement was a political earthquake that didn't just crack the partisan wall, it shattered it. The White House, which had been confident in its strategy of painting Jasmine Crockett as a lone, radical voice, was suddenly and completely isolated. Morrison wasn't just any Republican. He was a conservative icon, a man whose military record and political integrity were beyond reproach. His defection gave dozens of other moderate Republicans, who had been privately uneasy but publicly silent, the political cover they needed. The narrative collapsed overnight. This was no longer about attacking the First Lady. It was about defending the nation's veterans. In the East Wing of the White House, Melania Trump watched the clip of Morrison's press conference on a tablet, her face a mask of placid control. An aide stood nervously by, wringing her hands. The First Lady showed no anger, only a quiet, cool disappointment. In her view, Morrison hadn't just betrayed the party, he had betrayed the vision. He was a man of politics, of nuts and bolts, and he had failed to comprehend the higher purpose of her work. He saw budgets and programs. She saw the soul of a nation, but Melania Trump was also a pragmatist. She recognized that the battle was lost. To continue the fight would only tarnish the Beautify America brand she had worked so hard to build. A strategic retreat was necessary. She turned to her aide, her voice calm and decisive. "Prepare a statement. We will applaud the Congressman's commitment to our veterans. We will state that while the work of beautification is vital, nothing is more important than the well-being of our nation's heroes. I will personally request that the Office of Management and Budget find alternative funding sources that do not impact any VA programs. We will be gracious." It was a masterstroke of public relations, an attempt to seize control of a narrative that had spun wildly out of her grasp. She would not be defeated. She would choose to be benevolent. The move came too late. The Crockett-Morrison bill, now imbued with an unstoppable moral authority, sailed through the House of Representatives with a staggering bipartisan majority of 412 to 21. The few who voted against it were immediately condemned by veterans groups in their home districts. The victory was total. After the vote, Jasmine Crockett and Thaddeus Morrison stood side by side at a joint press conference. The cameras flashed, the reporters shouted questions. Morrison spoke first, briefly and powerfully, about the importance of keeping the nation's promises. Then he turned the podium over to Crockett. This was her moment. Her chance to declare victory, to spike the football after a week of relentless attacks. But she did none of that. She began by thanking Congressman Morrison, not just for his support, but for his leadership and his moral clarity. Then, she looked out at the sea of cameras, but her words seemed aimed at someone far away. At Sergeant Kaylin Rivera, at the countless others who had called her office. "This was never about curtains. It was never about gardens," she said, her voice filled with a quiet, steely conviction. "It was about a promise that is the very foundation of the relationship between a nation and its defenders. This vote today affirms that in the United States of America, our promises to our veterans are not discretionary line items. They are not negotiable. They are sacred." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Today, Congress upheld that promise. Today, we did our duty. Now, the real work of healing can continue. Thank you." She didn't take any questions. She simply nodded, shook Congressman Morrison's hand, and walked away, leaving the political victory to others. Her focus was already on the consequence of that victory. 3 weeks later, in a humble VFW hall in Houston, the lasting echo of that fight could be heard. The air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, a scent of quiet community. Sergeant Kaylin Rivera was arranging worn plastic chairs into a circle. The harsh, bitter lines on his face, so prominent in the news clip that had started it all, had softened. A few of the other men from his old therapy group were already there, laughing and shaking hands. The program had been reinstated the week before. As Rivera set down the last chair, a young woman approached him hesitantly. She couldn't have been more than 25, with wary eyes that seemed to hold a pain far beyond her years. "Sergeant Rivera?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Just Kaylin is fine," he said, offering a small, encouraging smile. "Okay, Kaylin. My name is Brielle. I saw you on the news a few weeks ago, and then I saw what that congresswoman did, and the bill passing and everything." She twisted a loose thread on her sleeve. I served in Syria. I got back last year. I haven't really talked to anyone about it. But my mom sent me the article saying the group was starting back up, and I thought, maybe I could." Kaylin Rivera looked at the young veteran, and for the first time in a long time, his smile was genuine, reaching all the way to his eyes. The anger was gone, replaced by a sense of solemn purpose. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "That's why we're here," he said, his voice soft but sure. "We save our own. Come on, find a seat. You're in the right place." Brielle nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her face, and walked toward the circle. Kalen watched her go, then took his own seat among the others. The fight in Washington, with its sound bites and political theater, felt a million miles away. But its impact was right here, in this room. It wasn't in the passage of a bill, but in the simple, profound act of one more chair being filled in a circle of survivors. It was the quiet, difficult, essential sound of a promise being kept. What does a country truly owe the people it sends to war? Is a promise only a promise when it's convenient? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the moments that shape our world.